Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the offensive auras, part of the trio of Holy X, actually quadro. It's a quadro of Holy X auras. Sanctuary is included in that because they're all Holy X auras. And this is Holy Fire. Holy Fire got some buffs recently, and it's pretty dang OP now. And you can utilize it in a bunch of different ways. Number one is you can natively use it. And to natively use it, of course, you have to build Holy Fire directly. And once you put your points into Holy Fire, you also have to beef up the synergies. So if you want to get Holy Fire to its maximum, you really have to build the Resist Fire Aura. And you also have to build the Salvation Aura, which is down here. Now, if you do that correctly, you end up with a pretty nice high-level Holy Fire Aura, which is going to dish out some pretty good damage. Now, there's multiple effects of Fire Aura, of the Holy Fire Aura. Number one is a pulsing damage. The pulsing damage is something that happens basically just every 2 seconds. It will pulse damage out to all the targets nearby. Now, if you go somewhere like Cold Plains and you find some monsters to donk on, you will find that the Holy Fire Aura tends to hit just about everything nearby for a pretty decent amount of damage. The other thing that was added recently in one of the patches was that Holy Fire Aura now increases its damage output versus monsters that are close to you. So what does this mean? Well, if you read the skill, it says that it does 352 to 906 fire pulse damage to any monster that is within range. However, it has a radius of 20 yards. So, if the monster is directly next to you, if they are standing within melee range, this doubles to basically, what is that, 700 to 1800 damage, which is a pretty good bump in damage increase for the monsters being near you. Now, this is just the pulse damage. The pulse damage is something completely different, of course, than the actual on-hit damage. So, Holy Fire also gives you a very massive damage bump to your attack, to your actual physical hit of the target. Now, how does this work? Well, basically, it's just a straight addition to your damage. So in this particular case, I'm going to show you what it's like if you literally just punch a target with Holy Fire up. So right now I have 2,514 to 3,353, and that is specifically because of the Holy Fire Aura. So if you look at my Holy Fire, my damage without Holy Fire Aura, I am only dealing 397 to 624, which not even really sure how I have that much with a punch attack, but you know, whatever. But when I put on the Holy Fire Aura, I am looking at basically 3,000 damage a hit. So I can switch to something like Zeal, for instance, and even just punching a target, I have a pretty significant damage output to any monster that's nearby. Now, of course, these monsters are immune to fire. Let me pick something that's not immune to fire, shall I? Let's see if we got something over here in the doojanks. Come a little closer. And I can literally punch the monster to death because of the fire damage from the Holy Fire Aura, as you can see. Now, the on-hit damage does require you to actually hit the target. The pulse damage does not. The pulse damage is going to trigger every 2 seconds to every monster nearby, and of course it scales depending on how close the monster is to you at any given point. Holy Fire is one of those abilities that actually does really good at low levels. When you're leveling up a Paladin, Holy Fire is actually kind of insane in normal difficulty. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, even Act 4 and Act 5 in normal difficulty, it pretty much just demolishes everything. And all you have to do is just build the Holy Fire Aura, the Resist Fire synergy, and the Salvation synergy. However, unfortunately, because of the way that fire resistance works in Diablo 2, and most monsters tend to become immune to fire in Nightmare and Hell difficulty, it kind of wanes off as you get into Act 4 Nightmare and up. Act 4 Nightmare is really where you're going to have the biggest issue, because that's where the majority of the fire immunes start to show up, and after that there are tons of fire immunes throughout the game, which make things pretty difficult. There are other ways to build Holy Fire with the exception of natively. So you don't have to only build Holy Fire natively. You can also build Holy Fire in other ways. Another way that you could build Holy Fire is through the use of items. So there are 3 such items within the game. 2 of them are one rune word called Dragon. The Dragon rune word is a shield rune word and an armor rune word, and it offers you a level 14 Holy Fire on both pieces of equipment. Now, item-based auras do not stack with native auras, unfortunately. So you cannot get a good effect if you utilize the native aura. So you're going to want to use something else besides the Holy Fire aura on your native use. And generally, when you're using the dragon armors, you're going to go with Conviction, which is going to be your main choice. So what you do is you run Conviction, which reduces the resistance of the monsters nearby, and you utilize the Dragon Armor, which gives you level 14 Holy Fire Aura, the Dragon Shield, which gives you level 14 Holy Fire Aura, and the Hand of Justice Phase Blade, or you could also make it in a Caduceus, which gives you level 16 Holy Fire Aura. And all of these add together. So you end up with 14 plus 14, which is 28, and then 14 plus 16, which is 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44. So level 44 Holy Fire Aura. Now, unfortunately, the aura itself is pretty garbage. So if you just build a Paladin and you utilize these pieces of equipment by themselves, the aura actually is pretty garbage, and it's not really going to dish out very much damage. In fact, to demonstrate this, let me go ahead and put my points back in, and I want you to see how much damage I'm doing right now. I'm only doing 1,233 to 1,572 with these 3 pieces on. And if I take them off, you'll notice that now I'm doing 137. So honestly, like, I wasn't even really getting that much from the Holy Fire Aura. So how do you increase the Holy Fire Aura? Well, you increase it the same way that you do when you're building the skill, except you don't have to build the skill. So when you're utilizing the items, what you're actually getting is you're getting the Holy Fire Aura at the set level of the items, which is level 44, as we just discussed. But you still need to build the synergies for the items. So to do this, you're going to look at the skill and say, okay, well, I need Resist Fire. So you're going to build Resist Fire. And then you can also see that you need Salvation. So you're going to build Salvation. And notice, all of a sudden, my damage has bumped up considerably by building the synergies for the Holy Fire Aura, but I do not have any points in the Holy Fire Aura itself, because the Holy Fire Aura is coming from the Hand of Justice, the Dragon, and the Dragon Shield. Now, these items can also be utilized on a Sorceress, using Fire Mastery. Instead of synergies, you utilize the Fire Mastery for this. Now, it is important to note that with the exception of the Sorceress and her Fire Mastery, the Amazon with maybe Exploding Arrow, and the Paladin with the synergies, there's really no other good use for the Holy Fire Aura. By itself, the Holy Fire Aura basically does no damage, and it's kind of useless. And if you don't have a way to increase the damage output of Holy Fire, it's not going to help you out at all. I've had a lot of people ask me questions like, what if I put Dragon Armor on my Mercenary? And I'm like, it's a bad idea. Don't do it. What if I put a Dragon Shield on my Act 3 Mercenary? And I'm like, it's a bad idea. Don't do it. These Holy X auras dish out basically no damage if they don't have synergy bonuses. And to really kind of like hammer that home, let's reset one more time, and let me show you what it's like to have maxed out Holy Fire. Or sorry, you know what? Let's do level 14, which is the level on the armor, right? So level 14 Holy Fire does 99 to 150 fire damage, pretty pathetic, and 16 to 50 fire damage, pretty pathetic. It's awful. Even if you had 3 pieces on at level 44, it still would be next to nothing. But if I can cap it out here, and I can put my points in so I can actually wear my equipment, And let me kind of show you what it's like to have the highest level that you can get, basically, right now is level 25. At level 25, I'm still only doing 378 damage and 126 pulse damage. It's absolutely garbage. Without the synergies, Holy Fire just does not do enough damage to actually be useful to, well, anyone, to be honest. And this is really what it comes down to, is if you're going to build the synergies, great. If you're not going to build the synergies or you don't have Fire Mastery, pretty much don't use it. The only exception to this rule is Hand of Justice.
I can't use
So,
this yet.
Hand of Justice is an oddity. Because Hand of Justice also has other effects on it, like negative 20% enemy fire resistance, and it has pretty decent damage, as well as freezes target, hits blinds target, all the other beautiful stuff. And it actually makes a pretty good weapon for a fire damage character. Now, remember earlier when I said, if you're not a sorceress, an Amazon, or a Paladin, Holy Fire is not for you. Well, the Amazon is the exception to that rule. The Exploding Arrow Amazon's best in slot bow is actually a Hand of Justice bow because it has the negative 20% enemy fire resistance, which is going to help out the Exploding Arrow tremendously. And also the Holy Fire aura, even though the damage that it adds is minuscule, the Exploding Arrow Amazon has a way to multiply that damage even further by utilizing the piercing effect along with the exploding effect of Exploding Arrow to take a small amount of fire damage and multiply it into a larger amount. So the Holy Fire combined with the negative fire resistance actually works quite well on the Amazon Exploding Arrow. Also Immolation Arrow, but not quite as well on Immolation Arrow because Immolation Arrow has a delay on it and it can't be spammed quite as easily. And believe it or not, yes, you can make Hand of Justice in a bow. Overall, Holy Fire has definitely come a long way from the past, which is where it was pretty much just a laughable skill that nobody really put points into. It was used somewhat for early leveling, but nowadays with the buff that they made to it, along with the double damage for the radial increase and other beefinesses that they have added to it, it's actually quite interesting to build a Holy Fire Paladin now. Whether you're doing the native Holy Fire Paladin, or whether you're doing what's called the Dragon Paladin, which is where you need the 3 dragon rune words, any of them can actually be quite effective. There is also another build that you can do, which is also very interesting with Holy Fire, and I feel like we need to talk about that as well. That is a build that revolves around using a bow. That's right, pretty much a Strider Paladin, which is any Paladin that utilizes a bow is considered a Strider. And I do believe I still have him up here. Of course, that's the Bow Sorceress. And where is my Bow Paladin? That's the question. Not really quite sure where my Bow Paladin is. So basically how it works is the Bow Paladin is utilizing the same thing that happens with the Exploding Arrow Amazon. And I guess the best way to show this off is to go to the Exploding Arrow Amazon, or maybe even just go to my Exploding Arrow Sorceress, because both of them will work. But basically what you're doing is you're utilizing the very nice effect of exploding arrow, like on a demon machine, a Chuko Nu, and you're using that to multiply out the Holy Fire damage. So you use maxed out Holy Fire, you grab your synergies, you put on your Holy Fire, and you utilize a bow. So specifically the Demon Machine Chuko Nu bow, that's the one that you want. And then once you have all your doojanks, need a little couple of these little doojanks here. I got no gold, what's? That is a travesty.
Yes.
And what this does is it takes the on-hit damage, which is 4,989 right now, which is a pretty decent amount of on-hit damage, and it adds it to the exploding arrow of the effect. The purpose of this is to multiply out the holy fire damage to astronomical proportions. If you do it correctly, you will end up with a character who is firing basically a nuclear bomb out of his bow. Now, Exploding Arrow has never been something that has been known for its single target damage. That's not what you get out of Exploding Arrow. It's all about hitting multiple targets at the same time, dishing out multiple explosions, multiplying the damage by up to 6, sometimes even greater than 6 times, depending on how they are actually focused. Now, this is P8, by the way, so do keep that in mind. But basically how it works is you fire your arrow in, it goes through multiple targets. You want to go through as many targets as possible, by the way. And once you pierce as many targets as you can, the explosions hit everything multiple times. And you can get this damage output to pretty insane levels. And I am failing horribly here. And once you get it to the right amount of damage, you set everything up properly, you can actually hit pretty dang hard, especially if you get your pierces off correctly. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a group of monsters that is all nice and tightly knitted, or you get them to focus up yourself. A very good place to go is somewhere like Arcane Sanctuary, where you have a whole lot of monsters all nice and neatly lined up for you. And when you fire your arrow into the monsters, like for instance the ghosts when they come nearby, you get multiple explosions which all hit the targets at the same time. This particular Paladin is a very fun one to build, and there's a couple different ways that this can be done. But getting enough negative resistances, using things like fire sunders, all of which will maximize the damage output to the point of absurdity. The only real downside to this, in my opinion, is the single target damage output is very poor. It's just kind of the way that this particular build works, is the single target damage never tends to be very good. The cool thing about this, though, is that you don't have to just be a Strider Paladin. So if you do build a full native Holy Fire Paladin, you can still have on your swap a whole nother set of equipment, a sword and a shield, and you can have your character set up so that he's also a melee character as well. So you can just switch and swap back and forth between the two. Unfortunately, you can't do this with the dragon armor and the dragon shield, because obviously if you're firing a bow, you're not going to be able to get that effect. Hand of Justice doesn't work because it doesn't have any piercing effect, which is the most important thing for this particular build. You need at least 66% pierce from the demon machine, and then if you throw in Razor Tail, you're sitting at 99% pierce, which means that your attacks will pierce more often. To give you an idea of how much damage this does, let's do a little calculation in the background here. So let me pull up my character panel, and we're going to have some fun with this. So my current damage output for fire is 4,989. This gets added directly to the exploding arrow from the demon machine Chukonu. I take this 4,989 and I multiply it by 6. This is 5 pierces plus the last hit that goes off after the original pierce, which means I can dish out a total of 29,934 damage for on hit. Okay? The fire damage is also added to the explosion, which happens on each on hit. The explosions also deal another 29,934 damage, which can equal up to a pretty large amount. However, the explosion is a radial explosion, which hits everything within its radius. So, if you have a particularly dense set of monsters, like let's say for instance you have 50 monsters, which are all nice and densely packed, and you can hit all of them with all of the explosions. So you have 6 total explosions, dishing out 29,934 damage. Then you have 29,934 damage times 6 explosions times 50 monsters, which just gets dumb insane. Because basically what we're looking at is we're looking at the explosion hits all of the monsters within the radius, dishing out massive amounts of damage per shot. And this isn't even the end of it, because I can fire off 2.27 attacks per second, which is going to equivalent to a lot of freaking damage inside of a large pack of monsters. Now, unfortunately, the damage output for a single monster is still just 4,989. So 4,989 times 2, because the damage gets multiplied. So I'm still only doing about 9,000 damage to a single monster. Each time you increase your fire damage, this increases even more. So utilizing things like fire damage charms, enchant sticks like demon limb can enhance this even more, and you just add and add and add as much fire damage as you possibly can to the equation. Because even just a small amount of fire damage, when multiplied times 6, times 50 cows within a large group, can actually equate to a large damage increase. And this is the reason why the Amazon is one of the only characters that can actually get good use out of Holy Fire Aura, because it can multiply that 140 fire damage that it's getting by a pretty nice amount. These builds are niche builds, and they're very fun to play. If you've never played a Strider Paladin, I would definitely recommend giving it a try, because it's just a fun way to build a Paladin. And theoretically, if you did it properly, you could have even more damage than an Exploding Arrow Amazon, because you would have the damage from Holy Fire Aura, and potentially, if you had an enchant Sork enchant you with a full damage enchant, they could add another 3,000 fire damage on top of that, making the fire damage just go through the roof, just insanely. And you would need to add in more things like negative fire res. Enigma is nice and all, but negative fire res helps this build so much that you would much rather be better off with something like a 4-faceted, like Jmod or something, or even an Arcane's Valor with a fire facet in it. You probably also want to put a fire facet in the Demon Machine. That's also going to increase your damage pretty dramatically. In fact, all the negative fire res that you can get is definitely what you want. If you can manage to get yourself 5% in the weapon, 5% in the armor, and 15% on the helmet, that's going to give you a very nice negative 25%, which isn't too bad, but you definitely could use more than that if you can manage it. Even things like a Conviction Aura from a Mercenary would be useful. Lower resistance from a Mercenary would be useful. Obviously, the Fire Sunder in here is going to make a big deal. I think I don't have a Fire Sunder for some reason. I must have stolen it from him at some point, which is probably the case. I think that's pretty much it for Holy Fire. It's definitely an interesting ability. It's much more powerful since they patched it. It has a lot of versatility across multiple characters. You can make a Holy Fire Sorceress. You can make a Holy Fire Paladin. You can make a Dragon Paladin. You can make a frickin' Strider Paladin. And it's pretty amazing these days. In fact, if you guys don't know about this, back when they were first buffing it up, they actually overtuned it like absolutely insane, and it was so powerful that you could literally just AFK and Players 8 cows and just murder everything that came near you. It was pretty bad. They actually had to dial it back a little bit to make it a little less broken, overpowered. Which they did, but it's still pretty powerful even after that nerf. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and keep watching.